So, how would you explain software-defined automation, which is typically referred to as SDA, to someone who works with industrial automation systems but, isn't familiar with the SDA concept?
Yeah, I think this is a very broad term that encompasses several concepts and probably means different things to different people. But for me, it's really answering the question of how do we create, deploy, scale, and maintain highly automated factories that are only going to get more complex than where we are in adopting technology. So for me, SDA is applying software engineering concepts that have been developed for large complex systems like the internet, cloud computing, networking, and trying to apply it to industrial automation. And I'll try to make that a little bit more concrete by making an example here. So one of the concepts of SDA is to make automation solutions less dependent on the specific automation hardware like PLCs, um, less dependent on that machinery in that space. So right now, if you had a PLC running on equipment, and let's say that you're doing a large expansion project, like adding 500 IO, right? If you run out of memory for programming or it like physically can't handle that number of IO, what you would do is you would go buy a larger PLC. You would have to load the firmware on it, have to go physically install it in the space, and then like someone's next to the machine starting that up. And I will contrast that with what it's like to run like general computing in like Amazon Web Services, AWS, where you could run a virtual computer and connect to it. Not for industrial automation, but just, you can start up a Windows server in the cloud and then start using it like a computer, right? So let's say you needed to install more applications on that computer. I can go in right now and with a couple clicks, make it reallocate to a larger processor, add more memory to it, and then like within a minute or two, it will be more powerful for computing. And that's like a pretty seamless thing that you can do right now. And you can even use software to automatically um, do that allocation, optimize it for what you're actually running. And it's not like someone at Amazon's data center is going and reconfiguring that AWS system for me, right? That is all
Mhm.
software based. And
Okay.
so for SDA, I think it's kind of thinking about what we could do in industrial automation that's similar. So you might have heard of like virtual PLCs. That is kind of like what that concept, where that concept comes from, is to be able to run PLCs in a virtual environment and use that computing power in a flexible way for what is the right size application when you need it. And if you were to do this at a larger scale, what could we solve by doing that? We could
Mhm.
probably optimize entire factories using software if we were to adopt this approach. So for me, it's kind of a shift in focus of thinking about software and how to apply it.
So it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like this is a further example of how the OT space is getting into adopting, more standardized IT technologies for application in on the plant floor. Is that correct, or is this something different from this trend we've been seeing for a while?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's like just the start of it. Like IT OT convergence is kind of like getting our data that's in there in the OT space over to IT, and therefore we need to use more pieces of what IT uses to
Hmm.
make that
Yeah.
happen, right? Whereas SDA is kind of one step further of like using software to really develop automation past where we are right now.